Hello, welcome to episode 11 of ProgPod. It's been a while, welcome back.
We're very glad to be back. We have an exciting string of episodes coming up that we can't wait for our listeners to hear, all 17 of you.
So you've heard of us doing our 50 favorite songs of all time, but now we're going to do our 50 favorite albums of all time.
So each episode we'll do 10 albums starting from 50 and then counting all the way down to number 1. And this is something we did last year, and it's been a little over a year now, I think, since we've last done this. And things have changed, so we like to typically do this once a year and figure out what new albums have come onto our list, where old albums have moved, what's moved out, stuff like that. So it's really interesting for us and hopefully for you people as well, to hear what our 50 favorite albums are. And once we're done counting down our top 50 favorite albums of all time, we're also going to each do our top 25 favorite artists of all time. And that will be quicker talking about them, since a lot of them likely will appear on this list and we'll have talked about them extensively. But just to let you guys know where our favorite artists are currently in time as well.
Okay, and first, before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about what it kind of means, because we're not trying to make any grand statements about what everyone should think the greatest artists of all time are or anything like that. We're just giving you our favorite albums of all time. And the thing you should take away from it is maybe you should check some of these albums out. That's the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
I don't expect any one person in the world to agree with me on everything on this. I'm sure you don't either.
Because we don't even agree on
exactly.
down
we have,
to
very
the numbers.
similar tastes. Yeah. So so we're not trying to make some grand assertions. And also, our favorites are obviously very colored by our tastes, which are for me modern prog. I'm not gonna have Illmatic on there or anything, because it's I like that album, but it's not what I listen to right now that much. So so that's just basically. I know some people on the internet like to get pissy about favorites.
Yeah, and the same goes for me. It's all personal enjoyment, emotional enjoyment. Many things go into it, but at the end of the day, it's typically personal,
your enjoyment,
enjoyment, and a lot of interesting things can make me personally enjoy an album. But that's how I curated my list: is how much personal enjoyment I get out of the albums compared to other albums. Yeah,
exactly. And I also think that it's fun to note that when something's the greatest, you kind of take into consideration did it influence a bunch of people to do this? But when something's your favorite, you don't necessarily it's cool if it did, but it's not necessarily whether you like the album.
And a lot of the stuff that are on our list are more obscure stuff that if you think it's amazing, that's amazing, but it's likely not going to influence a wider range of other musical artists because few people already listen to it.
Yeah, exactly. So, anyways, so hopefully you enjoy, and here we go.
Okay, so I'm going to get started. We're going to do 2 at a time and switch back and forth that way. So my number 50 is actually my same exact number 50 as last year. And which is interesting that it landed in this spot again. I didn't plan on this happening at all. Just happened to do that. And that album is "Close to the Edge" by Yes. It is probably my favorite classic prog album of all time. And when I say classic prog, I mean it's probably my favorite Big Six prog album ever. Definitely. And there are many reasons why I like this album. First off, the production is absolutely terrific for an album that came out in 1972, I think. It sounds gorgeous. The soundscapes are incredible. The musicianship is top notch. The songwriting is amazing. It's Yes at their absolute peak, in my opinion, of creativity, innovation, pushing the genre forward and music as a whole forward. It's just so perfect. One of my favorite standouts on the album is Chris Squire's bass work is just absolutely incredible on the whole entire album. The album has 3 tracks. It's a pretty short album. It's 37 minutes long. It starts with obviously the epic "Close to the Edge," which is just over 18 minutes. "And You and I" is a 10-minute track, and then "Siberian Catcher" is a 9-minute track, I believe. All 3 tracks are very different in structure and sound, but they all just work together so well, and I love the structure of the album, having the big epic first. When I first listened to this album, I'd say this is the album that got me into Yes, like super hard, and it's still my favorite album. When I first listened to the album, I like really liked the song Close to the Edge a lot, but the other two like didn't click with me for a while, and eventually those two clicked as well. And You and I is like just a beautiful song. There's like awesome acoustic moments. There's a really cool like keyboard solo that happens like around the 6-minute mark, where it comes to that really fun acoustic guitar bit. That song just like, I don't know, I get like really jolly when I listen to that song. And Yes is a band that like makes you feel like happy. I think their music is like typically happy, and we talk about this a lot. And I think like the melodies they write are just like very inspiring. And the album's just like tremendous as a whole. I can't recommend it enough. I think everyone should hear Close to the Edge at least once. Give it a shot. Next on my list is number 49, which is an album that almost didn't make the list this year, but it stayed in there. It made it last year. It dropped a little bit this time around. And that is Sleeping in Traffic Part 1 by Beardfish. One of the earlier Beardfish albums that I like got into first, and particularly one of the first Beardfish songs I really got into. And the song I'm talking about is Roulette, which is the 12-minute kind of long centerpiece in the middle. It's one of the first Beardfish songs I really fell in love with, and I fell in love with this album from that song. And this album is just like absolutely amazing. I think it's Beardfish stepping into a different direction after the Sane Day. Where the Sane Day is this very weird album. This album is weird. It's not quite as weird though. It's like, I think it's toned down a little bit.
I agree with that.
And then Sleeping in Traffic like doesn't they like immediately go back into that weirdness.
Yeah.
But with the vibe of this album, I think the Sane Day and Sleeping in Traffic Part 2 are very different in their weirdness.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, this album is more straightforward Beardfish, if that's even a thing. But it's a great album. It's structured like wonderfully. The production again is incredible, as on every Beardfish album. Highlights for me are Roulette. The Dark Poet is one of my favorite shorter Beardfish songs they've ever written. I love Sunrise, and also love the musical motifs that return throughout the album. The chorus from Sunrise is repeated at the end of what's the song called? Same old song, I think is what it's called. The final song. Great. Yeah. It's a wonderful album. I love it so much, and that's why it is 49.
Nice. Yeah, he actually posted a thing recently, Rickard Sjöblom, which I recently learned his name is Rickard. Rickard. I've been saying Ricard.
I've been saying Ricard.
Yeah. Anyways, he posted a thing of him like playing that Roulette.
Oh, awesome.
He said he's like at a concert, and he said he just like wanted to start
play it out live.
Roulette.
Oh yeah, I love that song. That song, really it's got like one of the most infectious choruses I think he's ever written. I love that chorus much, and also the meaning is like, for me personally, I take a lot of. I get the lyrics mean a lot to me in that song, and also I love the weird little breakdown on I think it's the accordion that they bring in at the end of the song. It's so weird, but it's so perfect. Yeah,
I guess that's like the wackiest song on one of their least wacky albums.
Yeah,
I feel like. But that's not even like
and even like the first half of the song isn't like that wacky. Yeah. But it's just written like beautifully.
So my first one is going to be an interesting one for Brandon, because I kind of mentioned it in passing the other day that it was going to be on here, but like I didn't say exactly what it was going to be. So for the backgrounds, me and Brandon do our own personal album of the week thing, where each week I give him an album and he gives me an album, and then we actually at the end of 2 weeks we do 2 albums that he gave me and 2 albums that I give him. We talk about it, and one that he gave me a long time ago, I mentioned to him was going to be on this list that was going to be unexpected. So do you have any last guesses? It's number 50, but
I couldn't guess. I couldn't think of what it was at all.
Okay,
I remember we did this last time.
It is Lighthouse by I Am the Morning.
That's super surprising.
Yeah,
that is mega surprising.
Which is an album that came out in 2016. They released another album called The Bell, very recently, and I really love that album a lot. And so I was like revisiting a lot of their old stuff, and then I realized like that I liked it a lot more than I thought. So I Am the Morning, they're a band that they play music that I'd say is relentlessly sad. They're like one of the saddest bands, maybe the saddest band that I listen to regularly. This album in particular is a concept album it's like a frame story, and it's like a woman standing on the shore getting ready to like jump in the water and like kill herself, and then it kind of like goes back through like all her ups and downs through like battling some mental illness, and before she eventually at the end of the album throws herself in the water and kills herself, which is very sad. And it's framed story-wise with lyrics, and it's also framed through the music. There's certain motifs that kind of play throughout the whole thing, and at the beginning and at the end. And the music itself is interesting because it's not your typical prog fare. It's basically two people involved. They have a lot of guest musicians that come in and out, but it's two main people. There's Marjana Semkina, who's this Russian singer lady who is like absolutely amazing. She has like very beautiful voice. Her voice is just so like fragile and like beautiful, and really plays the whole like depression thing so well, and like it's very convincing. And the other half of the kind of duo is Gleb, I hope I'm saying it right, Gleb Kolayadin, who is a classically trained pianist. So the whole album is basically mostly her singing and his piano playing, with some guest musicians. There's some cool bass stuff going on. There's a few guest guitar solos and guitar things going on. And there's Mario's Duda, or whatever, I don't know, from Riverside.
Yeah.
He comes in and he has a guest verse on Lighthouse, which is one of my favorite songs. It's kind of a duet, which is actually my favorite song on the album. So it's just a great album that has some really cool, sad melodies going on throughout, some kind of like threads that weave their way throughout the whole album, musical threads, and it kind of just leaves you really emotionally drained. Like there are times when you don't really want to listen to this album because it's so emotionally draining to me, but it's really good, and it's also really good musically and really interesting musically. Gleb, he's like a very, very, very good pianist. He's like super good. So yeah, really good album overall, and was that surprising to you?
That is mega surprising.
Yeah. I guess
that's one of the more surprising things you've ever revealed to me on this podcast.
Really?
Yeah. I would never have ever guessed that.
I thought if I had...
And I know you gave that like a 9, I think, or something around that. And I know you liked it a lot. I didn't know it was top 50 all time good.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, I really like that.
So you must have been listening to that behind the scenes for a while now.
I have, though. Yeah, I mean, because like the new album came out and I've listened to it, but honestly, it's been growing a lot on me over the years.
Yeah.
Because basically, anytime I want to listen to something like different, that was like not normal and like feeling sad or whatever, I would put that on. So it's kind of like since you gave it to me like 3 years ago now.
Yeah. That was year 1, I think.
Yeah, it was and so year 1 of Album of the Week. So 3 years ago was when I got it, and so I've just been listening to it.
And definitely agree. Then. Like that's not an album I can listen to full all the time. I need to be like in the mood. It's a lot like Heartless from Palbearer in that sense that I really need to be kind of already sad.
Exactly, yeah. So anyways, it's very sad. Anyways, my next one is one that you're going to also be somewhat surprised, but not really. I don't think you would be that surprised. This next one is one that I kind of told you wouldn't be on the list because I didn't think it would be. But it is The Itch Theologist by Giant Squid. You probably aren't surprised that a Giant Squid album's on here, but you might be a little surprised because I told you it wouldn't be. But anyways... So, The Itch Theologist is 2009. By the way, I've been trying to say all the dates. Lighthouse is 2016. So, this album is a very good album. It's their sophomore album, technically, but they released their first album twice, and they had an EP before this. So, it's really hard to call it a sophomore album. But I guess it is their sophomore album. It's a little less rough around the edges than the first one is sometimes. But it's by the band Giant Squid. They're a band who play sort of, I'd say, progressive sludge kind of stuff, but with a big asterisk, because it's very different from any other type of sludge I've heard. It's very different from Mastodon's super bouncy, shreddy, drummy style that's like very like bubbly almost, but still sometimes sad. And it's very different from stuff like Neurosis, which is just like crushingly heavy. Because this band, I wouldn't say they're ever really that crushingly heavy. They have a lot of moments that are very serene, which is, I think, a good word for it, and really quiet, tranquil moments that kind of play out interestingly and are really kind of interesting. It's not just like an acoustic finger-picked part here and there. It's like they have some trumpets that go on in the background. They have some really cool spacey songs. Like the song Mormon Island is like one of the spaciest songs I've ever heard, honestly. And like Sutterville has this like trumpet thing going on the whole time. It's like really cool. So they have some like jazzy kind of things and stuff like that, but then they also have like somewhat heavy kind of like maybe like raunchy like harsh vocal parts where it seems like a little messy but like on purpose, you know. It seems like a little bit like punk influenced, even though it doesn't sound like punk, where they're like kind of rough around the edges, but like that's clearly the vibe they're going for.
Chaos.
Yeah, totally, like controlled chaos is the thing. And another big highlight of this band is, first of all, I mean, they are all really good at their instruments, and that's really cool. But my favorite thing about this band, honestly, is that they have these really crazy, insane vocals that go on. And this album in particular, I think, is their best album for that. The main vocalist, who is also, I think, the guitarist, also they play banjo a lot on this album, Aaron John Gregory, he's like the main like mastermind behind it, I guess. And he plays all those instruments, and he also has this like crazy raspy like wailing voice that happens sometimes. But then he also has these like desperate shrieky vocals, and he has like clean vocals that are also really off the hinges and weird. It really fits the concept of the album, which is what I'll get in next, which is about a guy who finds himself on a lifeboat after a boat wreck, and he gradually turns both like metaphorically and physically into like a sea creature, and then he eventually tosses himself into the abyss. So 2 albums in a row about tossing yourself into the abyss. But anyways, and then dies. So it's basically like the vocals really fit that. The whole like unhinged vocals things really fits that well. And it's really cool. I could see the vocals being like divisive for some, as is the case with a lot of these bands that I'm going to talk about, but I really personally love them. And Brandon liked them too when I gave them to him, which I was good. Thought was good. So, really good album. Also, one more thing I want to say is that they're very oceany. They have like very good ocean vibes. And I feel like they are like... There's another band called The Ocean, which I feel like their oceaniness is like... reminds me of like way deep below the surface of the ocean. But this band reminds me more of like the crazy things that happen on the surface.
Seas.
Yeah, exactly.
I can see that.
Yeah. Because like the ocean's like heavier for sure.
Yeah.
You know, when they want to be, and then like you think about like just endless darkness and stuff.
Yeah.
And then this album is more like, oh, like a shark's gonna eat you. Like it's like that. Anyways, yes, that's my number 49.
So my next one, and just before I go into the next two, I was on a like 3-month hiking trip, and I spent a lot of time listening to a lot of my favorite albums that like helped me curate this and helped me fall in love with albums I knew I loved but hadn't listened to in a long time. And I think the next two are both good examples of that. And they're 2 albums I didn't know were going to make the list or not, but they still made the list. And 48 for me is Blackwater Park by Opeth, which is an album I hadn't listened to in full for like a while before this trip. And I listened to it, and it was like a very, very magical listen throughout this album. And it is like definitely still top 50 worthy, in my opinion. Opeth, we've talked about them a lot on this podcast, so I'm not going to go too much, but they're a progressive death metal band. And Blackwater Park is often heralded as their best album, and I think it is their best album. And there's just so many like great things about this album. Michael Ockerfeldt's vocals are like absolutely phenomenal on this album, both his clean vocals and his harsh vocals. I think it's the peak of his harsh vocal singing. Some people might disagree and say it's Still Life or Ghost Reveries, but this is where I think he sounds the best vocally. He's just got tremendous range. There's tons of like very delicate moments, and there's also just some badass riffs throughout the whole entire album. Specifically, like the riff that opens the closing track, Blackwater Park. I love that riff like so much. Just the like that whole thing. It's so cool, and that whole like intro. It feels like one like really long build up to like this epic moment around the 9-minute mark. That's just incredible. So that song is obviously amazing, and there are many other. The whole album is incredible. Funeral for a Portrait is incredible. I love Dirge for November, and obviously the well-known tracks. Bleak is like probably single-handedly responsible for me getting into harsh vocals in general. That's the first harsh vocal song I really fell in love with, and that song still holds a special place in my heart. I love Steven Wilson's addition on the chorus vocals there. And I love that Wilson helped produce this one as well because I think it sounds amazing. And obviously Leper Affinity is incredible. I love the part where it switches to the clean vocals around the 3-minute mark. That part is like super emotional. And yeah, Drapery Falls. I could go through all the songs, but they're all great. It's like as Still Life is the album. The 2 albums before this were concept albums, and this one is not. It almost like feels like a concept album to me because of how well it flows together. Yeah. I know it isn't though, and I think that's a really cool thing they were able to do with this album. And also the one that 2 that followed, I guess, Ghost Reveries. Those 2 albums, and particularly this one, flow so well that they feel like a concept album. It's another reason why I love it so much is if you start it from the beginning, it's like really hard to turn it off because everything just like flows so well into each other. So yeah, Opeth, 48, Blackwater Park. At 47, another one that I hadn't listened to all the way through in a while, and that is Lateralis by Tool. Just a tremendous album, probably one of the more popular albums on this list. And obviously, I mentioned production a lot. I'm pretty sure I'm going to say that a lot about a lot of these albums because I really appreciate good production. And Tool has really, really good production. I think this album sounds amazing. I think it's also the best songwriting they did in their career. There's so many cool things about this album. I think it's like Tool. If you want to get someone into Tool, I think you show them this album before you show them any other album. Just awesome, tons of build up. The song "The Patient" has this really, really quiet and delicate and really creepy build up. And it almost doesn't feel like it's gonna be a heavy song at all. And then a crushing riff comes in. That song's just incredible. Obviously, songs like "Schism" and Parable and Parabola are also great. Parable and Parabola also are 2 songs that really, really work well together. I literally can't listen to one without the other. And another thing this album does well is flow really well together. Even deeper tracks on this album, like Reflection, the 11-minute song, just amazing. There's so much good cool tribal drumming, which I think Danny Carey is a master at doing drumming like that. He's really good at doing all sort of drumming. He's a very diverse drummer. But they do a ton of tribal stuff with the drums and the bass, leading to these awesome payoffs and climaxes in those songs. Yeah, it's just an awesome album. It sounds great. The lyrics are tremendous. I think it's Maynard James Keenan's best vocal performance as well. And yeah, it's just a great album.
My next album is one by a band that I consider one of my favorite bands, obviously because they're on this list. But anyways, the band is Leprous, and the album is Coal, 2013. Coal is a pretty special album. It's the album where Leprous their sound kind of began to divert from the mainstream progressive metal, if you could even say that as a word. Before this album, they had released Bilateral, which, to be fair, is a very good album. It was sort of a maximalist thing, there are all sorts of guitar solos and crazy vocals and keyboards going everywhere and crazy drums everywhere. And it was very vibrant, and actually, the cover of that album is very colorful, and the music feels very colorful. But this album, there's 2 colors on the album cover, black and white, and that's what the music sounds like. They really went in a minimalist direction on this album. They traded all the guitar solos for just really focused rhythms that kind of chug along, and kind of lots of empty noise space. And also Einar Solberg, he delivers these crazy, amazing vocal performances which soar over the music instead of kind of blending in with it. They kind of just sounds like he's singing you a sorrowful dirge or something, to I don't know, it's crazy. So this album, even though I absolutely love Bilateral, maybe more than this album, maybe not, we'll see. I think this album is special just because they did something so different, and I honestly still don't think there are many bands that do exactly what Leprous does. And in my mind, this is still the most successful of their forays into the minimalist style. Although I think that the Congregation is very, very close. I also like that album. That was very close to making this list. But this album is just very, very good. The songwriting is really good. And favorite songs of the album are, definitely my favorite song is Chronic, but I also love Foe and Coal and Contaminate Me with the guest vocal performance from Nissan, who's also really crazy good. And anyways, this album is really unique, really interesting, such a crazy change of style. The rhythm section is going nuts. The guitar solos, again, like, they're not really a focus, but Bard Kolstad, the drummer, really shows off here. He's very, very talented at laying down fast, intense rhythms. And it's just a very, like, cold album. I'd say that's, like, a really good word to describe it, is just, like, cold. It's, like, not a warm, friendly album. It's, like, being alone in, like, a vast wilderness and it's snowy and then you run into, like, a wolf or something. That's this album. Anyways, yeah, so that is 48. Do you have any thoughts there?
No, I thought that would be on there.
Okay, yeah.
Potentially.
Cool. Okay. My number 47, you're not going to be surprised at all. You might be surprised it's not higher up. But it is Daffy's Elixir by Brian Scary.
Yeah, I don't think this was on there last year.
It wasn't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a little surprised by that.
Mm-hmm. So this is a 2012 release.
Yeah.
And we both thought until recently that this was his last thing that he released. But he actually released a bunch of things under the name Evil Arrows, which is weird. Anyways.
And Birds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Birds. So Brian Scary, he's another kind of non-traditional, like, I think he's definitely like a prog artist, but you wouldn't necessarily think that. Like, if you showed some of his songs to someone, they wouldn't think that it's like prog, probably. Mm-hmm. They'd probably be surprised. Sort of like I Am the Morning. And also, like I Am the Morning, the music is kind of piano-based. Brian Scary is an excellent pianist. He's like super good. He does all sorts of cool stuff. He like lays down really kind of atmospheric, moody piano parts, but then he also does like crazy, like fast technical things. And he plays like really poppy things, and he plays things that kind of feel like you're walking into an old Western saloon. Which honestly, this whole album sounds like you're walking into an old Western saloon, because it's Western themed. There's supposed to be a concept. I don't know the exact concept. I don't think you do either.
I don't. I can't find it.
Yeah, but it's definitely like Western themed. Like every song, really, you feel like you're like out west, which is one reason why it's a really good album to listen to when you're driving out west or going anywhere out west, because it just, especially in the desert, it just feels very deserty. Yeah. So the actual music here is it's very like poppy in a lot of ways, because there are a lot of catchy moments and a lot of interesting things that like immediately grab you. But there's also a lot of complexity here, a lot of interesting textures and things going on, and lots of like catchy kind of choruses, but also just a lot of weirdness too. There's a lot of weirdness in this album. My favorite songs of the album, actually, it's really hard for me to decide. I love The Wicked Frontier, which is like such a good intro to the whole thing, because that really does feel like you're like plodding through a desert on your way to some like town. And then I also love Diamonds, which like has this one part where it's about diamonds. There's just nothing has ever sounded more like diamonds than that song.
I feel like just the intro, like piano, that little melody plays just makes me think of Diamonds like immediately.
Totally. But also Red Baron of Arizona is also like one of my favorites. That one might be my favorite if I had to like, it's one had a gun to my head. But yeah, so I really like this album. It's pretty different. It's another like album that's not quite your typical prog fare, but it's really good.
All right, my number 46. Eric talked about this band a second ago, but it is Bilateral by Leprous. And Eric mentioned a lot of things that this album does really well, in that it's like completely maximalist to the core. But I still think on Bilateral, Leprous had a sound that no one else did, even if it was doing a lot of, because a lot of prog is like maximalism,
right,
I would say.
Yeah, totally.
And yeah, I still think they have a certain sound that like they fill a certain like niche that no one else can for me, and even more so in those other albums. But Bilateral is just like such a perfect prog metal album to me, even if it is like more standard fare and maybe they're not pushing the boundary as much with their sounds. I think it's just a really, really, really well done progressive metal album, and I always come back to it. It's just an amazing album all the way through. It still has my favorite Leprous song. Forced Entry is just like one of my favorite songs of all time. I'm pretty sure it was on. I think it was on the 50.
It was,
it was in the upper reaches, but I think it was on there. It's such a well written song, and I really like Einar Solberg's harsh vocals. I've always liked them a lot. And there's I don't even know if he does he does a few on Cole, I think. and then I think he's completely dropped them ever since, which is fine. That doesn't bother me that he's made that decision. But I personally like them, and I think it adds a lot to the music, especially on this album. I think they're really good and they fit everywhere they are. And his voice, like you mentioned, is just like, it's so angelic. It's perfect. And I will say that his clean vocals over time, I think, have gotten better. I never thought they were bad, but I think Bilateral is not his best.
Yeah,
I think it's amazing, but I don't think it's his best clean vocal performance. I mean, I would argue Molina is his best clean vocal performance. I think he's gotten better every single album they've done. But yeah, the album just is perfect. It's got a really cool like opening. It just like hits you like immediately, like with that like really cool like guitar riff, and then like some like kind of like chanty type vocals, and then it like molds into Fourth Century. It's got probably my favorite like ballady type, I guess, if you want to call it Restless or Thorns, like more of their like slower songs. But yeah, Thorns is amazing. Thorns has got a really cool like, I think it's a saxophone solo that's just like awesome. Yeah, it's a Painful Detour, like I would kill to see that song live. I don't think that's a song they're gonna be bringing out like a lot, but I love that song like so much. Yeah, it's a tremendous album, and like Eric said, there's like a ton of really cool guitar solos, which like I love Leprous and I love everything they've done, but one thing I like really miss is like the really cool guitar solos they used to have. I thought they were like, I don't know, they were some of the coolest guitar solos I'd ever heard at the time when I first listened to this album. Especially the Fourth Century one is like, I love that solo so much, and I do sometimes yearn for like just like one. Throw me one of those, like one of those in like their new albums. But that doesn't seem to be the direction they're heading, which is fine. I think everything they've done is fantastic. But yeah, it's just an awesome album. Amazing production, amazing instrumentation and vocals, and yeah, it's 46. Number 45 is another Beardfish album, and it's plus 4626 Comfort Zone. And this is an album that I've always liked, but I think if I'm doing it in the realm of like greater Beardfish, I used to always put it behind Sleeping in Traffic Part 1 for like the longest time. And I don't know, I guess maybe the last year or so I've really grown to like this one more. And it's Beardfish's swan song, and I think if they have to have a swan song, which is unfortunate, it's a really good swan song to end on. It's a really good album. And I think like the themes of it kind of make it like that feel that way as well as like a really good swan song. Basically the themes are different levels of comfort zones relating to many different things throughout the album. And it's something I relate to a lot. I've talked about a couple of these songs on top of the songs of all time. Obviously Comfort Zone and If We Must Be Apart, A Love Story Continued, which are definitely my two favorite songs. But the whole album is like set up in such a way that it makes for like a really enjoyable listen. There are 3 songs. What is it? The inside, the 3 parts.
The one inside.
The one inside. Yeah, it opens with the first part. In the middle, there's the second part and the third part. And those songs are really like tender and like almost like interlude type songs. But they're like 3 to 4 minutes long. But they really like help keep the album in like a really nice flow. And I always get like really emotional during like the final song with those like that piano melody, the dun 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 dun, like that part. You always get super emotional at the end of it. It's got some like my favorite Beardfish lyrics as well. Some like really really serious as on Comfort Zone and If We Must Be Apart, but some like, and I think they are serious, but like in a more wacky way, like on Ode to the Rock and Roller has some amazing lyricism, I think. And yeah, the whole album is tremendous. And also Can You Hear Me Now? Is that that one's got some more like wacky lyricism. Yeah. That's one of my favorite like shorter Beardfish songs. But yeah, really good album, and it's my number 45.
All right, my number 46 is Intronauts, Habitual Levitations, Instilling Words.
Another new one.
Yeah. Although this one might have been like on it 2 years ago or something. I feel like my list last year wasn't very good. I feel like I didn't do that good of a job. I feel like this one should have always been on there. But anyways, so this one, like I feel like the progression in my mind has been like gradually off the list. But if it wasn't on there last year, that's like okay. So anyways, this album came out in 2013, and Intronaut is a band that I realize is like somewhat hard to describe without sounding like you're also describing the band Tool, even though they don't sound anything like Tool.
Don't sound anything like
But
Tool.
like when it's there's like other like a rhythm heavy bands that like focus a lot on like crazy weird polyrhythms and like singing that's like very like atmospheric.
Sounds like
and
Tool.
like somewhat heavy, yeah. And then they have clean sections. Yeah, it's like it is like very Toolish, you know. But like they don't sound anything like Tool. I'd say like the biggest difference is that they are like a metal band. Like they do have like actual metal riffs that happen.
Harsh vocals.
Yeah, and harsh vocals and stuff. Like definitely get like a notch heavier than Tool for sure. In my opinion. And yeah, so Habitual Levitations is my favorite of their albums. It is their second to most recent one. Their style, like, is pretty much what I said. Like, they just have really interesting, cool rhythms, and lots of like jazzy parts that go along, like lots of jazzy guitar work. They don't like have too many crazy solos or anything, but unlike a lot of bands that are like like Tool clones, I feel like the guitar is like very present on this record. Like it's not like just like the guitar is like just kind of there. Like it definitely has a big presence, like especially in a lot of like jazzier parts. But there is again a big focus on the bass and especially the drums. Danny Walker is the drummer for them, and he's like a very, very good drummer. It's a pretty emotional like album, I'd say. The vocalist, who is Sasha, who is also like one of the guitarists, he is like Sasha Dunable, who actually makes his own guitars, by the way. He has like his own whole company. I think he's like making bank doing that. But anyways, he like isn't like the most flashy vocalist ever or anything, but he delivers like lyrics in a way that conveys emotion very well, I feel like. And he has some pretty interesting vocal lines, and he kind of does this thing where he like sings in a way that's like slightly like tastefully off key from like the actual rhythms and stuff that are going on, which is weird, but it's like very like purposeful when he does that. This album is also kind of jarring in a way. It's not like a great intro to prog album, I think, because there's some really weird moments. Like the song The Welding starts off with this weird industrial like chirp sound, which is actually just a guitar
used to
noise
not
that he's
like
doing.
that song.
I really didn't like that song because of that. But then like the whole song just builds around that. And also on the song The Way Down, which is the last song on the album, like the last 2 minutes are just like this weird electronic.
Like synthy thing.
I say it sounds like the Transformer, like, or it sounds like Optimus Prime trying to fly through a tornado, but like failing. Because it's just like this weird electronic sounds, but then like kind of crashing all the time, which is really interesting. They write songs in really cool ways where like the transitions in the song are very seamless. Like they'll have a song that starts off one way, and then by the end it sounds completely different because they've layered on all sorts of guitars, they've layered on vocals, and then the guitars have changed a bunch of times, but like you have a hard time going back and pinpointing like, oh, this is exactly where it changed, because it's very like subtle and gradual. Like for example, the song Eventual is a song that starts off with like a very simple like little guitar thing, and then like the bass comes in, and the drums come in, and then the vocals come in, and then the guitar riff kind of changes like subtly, and then by the end it's like this weird like picky thing that's like super complicated actually, which is really interesting. My favorite songs in the album, I like Killing Birds with Stones, which is the first song, and I also like Eventual, which I just mentioned, and Harmonimacon, which is like a very, very jazzy track with some really cool bass work going on. Absolutely love that song, and I like the album overall. All the songs are very good. This is an album where like I think all the songs are great. Okay, number 45 for me is our first repeat. It's one that you've already mentioned. Can you guess which one it's going to be?
Bilateral.
No, it's actually Close to the Edge.
Okay.
By Yes, which actually was on my list last year.
Yeah.
But
I remember that.
1972. I like it for... Brandon talked about it really well. He spoke really well about it, so I don't have that much more to add. I think like one of the things I really love about it, again, is that like it is, as Brandon mentioned, like super happy. And it's probably... I don't know if it's the only happy record on this, but it is probably the happiest, I'd say, on this list.
I think that would work for mine as well.
Yeah, because it's very jolly. And one of the things about Yes is they have like really complex music. On this album, it doesn't sound like they're like showing off too much, but it's clear that they're very talented. They also have some really cool melodies, and that like kind of build cathartically, especially and You and I. That like really the melody at the end is like so cool.
Yeah.
Like how it kind of builds the whole time towards this like cathartic
that
thing.
big like climax at the end. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
With I love the vocal passage at the end too. Over all that music.
Yeah, exactly. It's so cool. And it's really like emotional. I feel like too.
But
in like a happy way, which is
then it comes back to like full circle to the
quiet
little guitar picking like.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's also is some prog weirdness, but I think this is like a good album to show people who might be into prog. I feel like if you have any possibility of ever being into prog and you listen to this album and give it like a fair shot, then you should like it.
Yeah, like I think the stuff on Siberian Catcher, the guitar stuff they do is like really kind of weird.
Oh,
like
it is,
that.
yeah. The very beginning is weird. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and actually, the beginning of Close to the Edge is really weird.
Yeah.
It's got that really weird, like, rainy thing.
And then it's just like an onslaught of like musicianship.
Yeah.
And then like it kind of just like full stops and like John Anderson just is like,
Yeah, exactly.
And then it like goes back to that.
Yeah.
Like,
but yeah, so I think it has a lot of the weirdness and complexity and long songs of prog, but it's got such like cool melodies and good everything, and it's like weird in the right ways that I feel like could appeal to people who like might be into prog. Like I feel like if you take a person A and they have a fair shot of this album and then they don't like it after the end of the fair shot, which is like a couple listens, maybe a bunch of listens even, then they probably will not like prog ever. I think. Almost. Not that there's like nothing that they wouldn't like, but I wouldn't say that.
Because I think it has like weird moments, but also like there's like so many catchy moments as well.
And there's things to like a lot of the melodies are like kind of timeless and like Also, I feel like John Anderson has a really good record on this album. Like, he has a really good performance on this album.
He's a great vocalist.
He's really good, and I think this is one of his better performances, especially on And You and I. He like does a really good job on that one. I feel like. He always does, but like. Down especially. So, love that album. It's good. That's why it's number 45. It's also one of only 2 classic prog albums on this.
Nice. Okay. My 44 is a band that's been mentioned a lot on this podcast before. Just want to, I guess, start by saying, I guess this is the album to get me into prog metal, as it's probably the one I really liked first. And that is Images and Words by Dream Theater. It's a little lower this time around. I still love it like so much, but there are just other things that have overtaken it over the years. And this is an album. The first time I tried to listen to it, I like stopped halfway and like I literally like didn't make it through the album.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't think I like this band.
Yeah.
And like for some reason, there was like a certain melody from one of the earlier tracks of the album that was like stuck in my head. And I was like. I think it was like maybe like 3 or 4 days later. I was like, all right, I'll give it one more shot with Dream Theater, and I don't know. I just like kind of clicked then, and I liked it like a lot that time. And as I listened to the band and this album more and more, I like fell in love with them. Obviously, Images and Words is I think a really really good album to show someone who's trying to get into progressive metal. I think it's a really good gateway album for progressive metal because there's a lot of reasons I think that. I think it's not super heavy, first of all. It's definitely a metal album, but it's not going to like kill you with heaviness ever. There's no harsh vocals. There's like some higher pitched vocals, which I think are helpful. And also it's like Dream Theater being less completely insane musically than normal. I think there's a little more restraint. And I think that's partially because this is their second album and they're still like finding their footing in the genre. But I think Metropolis, to compare, is like a more technically crazy album. And if I had to show someone a Dream Theater album first, I definitely show them Images and Words before Metropolis, even though I think Metropolis is better. I think they're more likely to like Images and Words initially and then maybe try other stuff. So I think it's like not just for Dream Theater, I think just for the genre as a whole, it's a great gateway album. And it's by many considered one of the best progressive metal albums of all time. And obviously I think so as well. It's a tremendous album. The musicianship is incredible. It features Kevin Moore on keys instead of Jordan Rudess, who was with the band before Jordan Rudess joined. Kevin Moore has a completely different playing style. He's way more restrained on his instrument, which some people prefer. I like them both. I prefer Rudess, but anyways, yeah, and it's one of James LaBrie's best performances. I think Awake he's slightly better on, but I love his performance here. He's in the absolute prime of his career. Some crazy vocal passages on this. There's tons of like really like long sustained high vocal sections that are super, super impressive. I remember when I first really got into Dream Theater, I was obviously impressed by the musicianship a lot. But one thing that took me off guard was how impressed I was by James LaBrie's vocals on some of these early albums. I thought it was like really cool how like good he was. And a lot of people don't like James LaBrie. I think he's tremendous. I always have, still do to this day. But yeah, the really good songwriting. Obviously, Pull Me Under is like their most popular song. But the best songs in this album are the ones that are less talked about. Learning to Live, the closing track, is an amazing song. It's one of their best songs, I think. And it's got a little like song before it called Wait for Sleep that is reprised in Learning to Live. It's got a really cool vocal section where James LaBrie builds up to this. I think they call it the F5, which is a very high like pitch on the vocal scale or whatever. It's really cool, and it leads into this like incredible like guitar solo by Petrucci. And for Petrucci standards, it's a quite short solo, but it like emotionally works like so well. Before leading into this really cool keyboard and piano section where it like reprises the Wait for Sleep melody. And it's got an awesome outro as well with the guitars and keys like kind of playing off one another. Obviously, the instrumentation throughout the whole album is great. Metropolis Part 1 is a tremendous song that also works as a prelude of sorts to Metropolis Part 2, the album. Under the Glass Moon has one of John Petrucci's best solos in their entire discography, I think. Surrounded is a great ballad. I think this album probably has Dream Theater's best like ballad songs, like Surrounded, Wait for Sleep, and Another Day. And Take the Time is a classic Dream Theater and classic prog metal song with some really, really cool melodies. The album sounds great as well. I don't think it's Dream Theater's best sounding album. I think it sometimes for me is like a little flat, but it still sounds great in the grand scheme of things. It's an amazing album to get into progressive metal music. And it's a great album. My next one, 43, is an album that a lot of these I've said are like very important, like firsts for me. This one, like I feel like I maybe don't talk. I think I talked about this a decent amount, but this one, like as I've realized as the years have gone on, how important this album was for me into like really diving deep into progressive rock and progressive metal a lot as well. That album is Aquarius by Haken. And yeah, I don't know. The first time I ever listened to this album, I'd heard a lot about this band. It was around when I think The Mountain had come out. Yeah, I was like 6 months after that had come out, and they were getting talked about a lot. So I heard about them, and I listened to this album. I thought the album art was interesting. I knew they were a progressive metal band. I had no idea what they were going to sound like at all. And I've always mentioned this, but the first time I heard the song Streams, which is the second song on the album, it's got this really whimsical like piano melody and this acoustic guitar stuff going on. And it literally encompasses like, I every time I listen to it, I think like I am a fish and I am like jumping around in like a nice little stream.
A fish
whatever.
Jumping around, yeah.
And like honestly, the lyrics like are like kind of like implying that as well. It's a concept album as well. I think it's Haken's like cheesiest concept album. I don't think the album is cheesy. I think there are like a couple cheesy moments lyrically, but overall, I don't find the album cheesy at all. But like, anyways, that like the weird piano stuff and all the like really like fun lyrics and stuff like that on Streams, I was like, whoa, this is like really cool. And then all of a sudden the song like shifts to like this like really like doomy metal section in the middle with like harsh vocal. I was like, whoa, that is like really cool. And they like seamlessly transition from that into like back to this whimsical thing. And I was like, I've never heard anything like that. And I was like super fascinated. From then on, I was like, I have to find more bands that do like insane stuff like this. And I think like this album played a big role in me just like going down the rabbit hole and like looking and trying to find more and more stuff. And also it made me fall in love with Haken, who is one of my favorite bands of all time. The album is like it's a concept album. It flows wonderfully. It's got some really cool like circusy like sections on the album as well, especially like probably my favorite one is the the one on Aquarium.
I love that
the middle of the song right before that nuts guitar solo they do there. It's so cool. All the vocals are incredible. That song's got some really cool vocal stuff going on as well. The chorus is super catchy in my opinion. I don't think everyone would find it catchy, but I think it's catchy. And also the first part of Celestial Elixir, which is the 17-minute closing track. They kind of reprise the opening these really haunting keyboard melodies before going to this really fun circus section 30 seconds in the song, and it's just so weird. And I don't know, the guitars do a really good job of playing that circus section. I know they brought in some other instruments. I think there's a tuba going on in the background as well in that section. It's really cool, and they can just seamlessly transition between just genre bending basically. So many different genres into one album, and it still sounds cohesive. Besides all that, the album is super emotional for me. I think the concept works really well, and I always get the part at the end in Celestial Elixir where it comes back into that keyboard section at the 12-minute mark right before Ross comes in one more time before it slows down for the vocals. It always gets me super emotional, and seeing it live, it was just awesome seeing them do that part live. Before reprising the streams part. I could talk about that album for a super long time, so I digress. But it's a very, very good album, and it's just incredible.
Cool. All right, my number 44 is the other classic prog album, and I guess the last classic prog album of this whole thing, and it is Animals by Pink Floyd, 1977. And this is an album that is not Pink Floyd's most popular album, obviously, not by a long shot. And it's not generally everyone's favorite, but I think a lot of the prog fans of Pink Floyd have it as their favorite, because it's not as wacky and crazy as their earlier albums, but it's just really good. It's a really perfectly executed concept album that evolves and is really interesting, and is very just proggy. It sounds very proggy, honestly. So this album, if you're not familiar, it has a cool concept, and I'm not gonna explain how Pink Floyd sounds that much because you probably know, because Pink Floyd are one of the most popular bands ever. But it's a concept album about 3 different animals: dogs and pigs and sheep, and about what they represent in society. So dogs represent kind of cutthroat, businessy people in the world, kind of the big go-getters, and just your average kind of wealthy businessy working man, and then sheep are just very average people, which now it almost sounds bad because that's been used so much, you sheep, you know, but it's kind of and then pigs are kind of the super wealthy high up people, and I guess there are different types of pigs. I don't know all of it that much, but the album has 5 songs overall. 3 songs are about the pigs, and then in the middle of it, it's kind of framed by 2 short songs about pigs called "Pigs on the Wing" parts 1 and 2. But the 3 songs that make up the meat of the album are "Dogs," which is 17 minutes, "Pigs," which is 11.5 minutes, and "Sheep," which is 10 minutes. And those songs are all I think those are 3 of Pink Floyd's best songs. "Dogs" is my favorite on the album. It really it sounds very sinister. The lyrics are pretty sinister, and it's got some really cutting guitar work. I think it's got some of David Gilmour's best guitar work, actually, which is saying a lot because he's a very good guitarist. Everyone respects him a lot, and he has amazing riffs. It's just a really neatly structured song too. That kind of comes. It starts off with a really cool guitar riff thing that kind of builds up, and then it kind of has a long kind of ambient part. And then it kind of goes back into the first riff towards the end, which is very kind of cathartic and sounds really cool. And "Pigs" is another really good song. It kind of sounds very piggy, how they mean it. And then "Sheep" is it's my second favorite on the album. It's a really interesting song for them. It's kind of keyboard driven at first, and it has this really weird thing at the beginning where I think Roger Waters is he starts off a lyric and then it kind of trails off into a synth line that kind of waves around and shimmers, and it's really weird, but it really captures how I would feel in a stampeding herd of desperate animals or people, where it's just like totally helpless and brainless and stuff, and like so it's really interesting. But that one's maybe like, I think Dogs is like my favorite song on the album, but I think Sheep is the most effective one at conveying like the message. Anyways, so it's a really good album. Pink Floyd are a good band. They're very good, I think. And it's really weird how much more popular they are than all the other prog bands. Yeah. But yeah, awesome. Okay, so my next one is one that is a lot different from that one, but still a concept album. So it is Between the Buried and Me Colors, which was released in 2007. Between the Buried and Me, they're a band that was introduced to me through Brandon. I had heard of them for a long time, but I hadn't really gotten around to listening to them, and Brandon gave me Parallax 2 for an album of the week. And that was like before he liked them as much as he does now. I think when you gave it to me, you liked them a lot by then, but it wasn't like quite like favorite. It was like the beginning of your fever for like Between the Buried and Me.
The year of 2018 was the year between the band and I.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this band, they play like a really frantic brand of like really proggy, kind of jumpy, like all over the place in a good way, like progressive, not metal, but like it sounds like metal, but it's kind of punky, like metalcore type stuff.
Deathcore, although that doesn't even work either.
Yeah, it doesn't really. Yeah, they're kind of hard to categorize, especially because of how wacky they are. And on that note, Colors is kind of like the album where they kind of came into their own, finally, I'd say, because their first couple albums aren't them being like, I think, who they wanted to be, maybe. Mm-hmm. And Colors is the first album they're like, oh, we're this weird, which is what I like. So it's a very good album. It's just got some really killer songs, and the whole album is like totally seamless. Like all the tracks go into each other. I don't actually know the concept, honestly.
Yeah, I don't actually either.
Yeah.
Weird. Oh, I do know that the whole album is supposed to be like one song.
Yeah,
actually. Yeah, which is why it is so seamless. Yeah.
Yeah, because like for example, one of the songs, "Answer the Sky," like starts like in the middle of a guitar solo. Yeah. Anyways, this album is just really good. I think like this is gonna sound really cheesy, but like all the songs are good on this album, even though it's only one song. But like it has two especially that are like very, very, very good. I think "Answer the Sky" is an amazing song that is like, again, it's all the genres that I mentioned, like just kind of like metalcore type progressive stuff, and really crazy and emotional and like interesting. But then it also has like a crazy bluegrass part, which is really interesting and weird. But like, when you say that, like there are bands that kind of jump around a lot, and like maybe they'll throw in some weird genre for a minute or two, but it doesn't like work. But Between the Buried and Me, they always make it work. Like you can trust them that they have a bluegrass section in the middle of their
like I think you could like give them a genre, any genre, and be like, throw that into a song.
Yeah, and they would do it well.
I think they would do it well.
Yeah, but that's not even the best song on the album, because White Walls is the best song on the album, and that song is also really, really good. Just like a very energetic like song. I love how it starts off with like that after Viridian.
Yeah,
and it's really cool. So, anyways, this album is really good. Brandon's probably going to talk more in depth about this one, but I like that one a lot.
All right, my number 42 is a band I literally just talked about, and it is Visions by Haken.
Wow.
These Aquarius and Visions have become very close over time. I guess they've become closer. I definitely still like Visions more, though. It's weird. I think they're very close in how I rate them, but I like have always definitely preferred Visions. And I think you prefer Aquarius to Visions.
A little bit, but like by about the same amount.
Yeah, and a lot of people on like Reddit will say like this is Haken's best album. They will never do like better than this, which I like don't agree with. Yeah. But I think Visions is a fantastic album. I think everything that was done in Aquarius conceptually was done better on Visions. I will say Aquarius is definitely like wackier, for sure. And Visions is more. It's still wacky, but it's more of a straightforward progressive metal album. And like Bilateral, I just think it's executed like perfectly, which a lot of times like it doesn't have to be like the weirdest thing ever, like, or the wackiest thing ever.
Right,
if
yeah,
it's like executed like flawlessly, which is why I like it a little more than Aquarius. I think it's a little less cheesy than Aquarius, is what lyrically. I don't think Aquarius is like cheesy like that much.
Right, yeah.
But Visions, I don't really find any cheesiness in it. And yeah, just like I feel like the concept is executed more. I think the motifs are brought back more, and like bringing everything together. I really like the opening track of Premonition with all like laying out like all the themes, and all those musical themes in that song are like brought back in different songs. And I'm a sucker when that's like done. I'm a sucker for that kind of thing when that's done really, really well. And I think it's done really well on this album. But yeah, it's just like an amazing album. It features one of my favorite Haken songs in Visions, which is a 22-minute monolith of a track. I remember the first time I like really got into this track. For a very short time, I think it was like my favorite song of all time.
Yeah.
And it's still like, I think it was like in the top 10 like this year, so it
yeah,
still obviously like means a lot to me. But like the whole album kind of is building up to this like giant like track at the end. And there's still like so much cool stuff, like on Nocturnal Conspiracy. Ross delivers some of his best vocals on this album, I think. There's some like really, really difficult vocal section he pulls off in the chorus of that song. And there's this really cool section where he just like kind of slows down and does like really atmospheric thing. And I think it's like, for me, it's like a classic Haken passage where they're like, the lyrics are like discussing like the trial or whatever. It just like, it's a very like Haken-y type thing they're doing there. It's like super atmospheric, very emotional. And there's lots of moments on this album that are like that. Other great songs, obviously the Portals, the instrumental, is like super, super technical. I also think this is like one of the most technical albums. Everyone's just like going nuts on their instrument, especially the guitars. I think the guitars are just like nuts throughout the whole entire album. And there's a really, really cool guitar solo in Portals that is just like super, super technical before like coming to this like really soaring, like melodic, like really satisfying like end to the song, before going into the Shapeshifter, which is like the final part of this like 3-song suite and it's jammed into the middle of the album, which is also like a tremendous track as well. And then there's like a song like Deathless, which I'm not sure they've written a song like that like since. It's like very, very jazzy, super, super emotional, dealing with like themes such as suicide. It's a very good song. I still don't think they've written a song like that since. And obviously you come to Visions, which is like this giant track. It kind of opens with like these like really atmospheric like spoken word vocals, before coming to this like really cool like guitar and keyboard like unison type melody. And actually the drums, and I mentioned this in the songs, the drums that come in, the drum fills that start the song off and end the song are like some of my favorite drum work like ever. And there's a lot of like wacky Haken moments in this song. There's like obviously around the 9-minute mark, there's that like really wacky like Ross Jennings like verse they do there. And there's a lot of like the I guess you don't remember even that part where they're like all like doing like vocals together. And also the song has like one of my favorite guitar solos of all time, around like the 14-minute mark, which is like super, super emotional, and still like very technical, but like more restrained and more like I guess if you want to use the word soulful, I guess that would like apply there. But it's a super good song, and it's a super good album, and just like has a really satisfying, cohesive feel throughout the entire thing. So that is why it is 42 and 41. And I've said this a lot, but this is a band I literally just talked about because the next album is Vector
Nice.
by Haken.
Yeah.
I didn't like plan for them to be like 3 in a row like this. It's just
Yeah.
like how the list like ended up.
It's a
like
conspiracy.
yeah, it's a nocturnal conspiracy.
Yeah.
But this is just like how the list ended up happening, and this is like this album is probably like turnaround of the century.
Yeah.
Like
seriously.
for how I felt
you were
about
like
it.
upset the first time we talked about that.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Yeah, like I like didn't love this album the first time me and Eric talked about it. And like I don't know, ever since then I've just like really grown to like love it like so much. And it's weird because like all the reasons Eric talked about loving it, like when we first talked about it, are like now similar reasons to why I love it so much.
Yeah.
It just like it's a slow burn for me for whatever reason. But yeah, Vector is like a lot different from the 2 albums I just mentioned, as it's like Haken's latest release, so they've like evolved their sound a lot. It's their shortest album by a wide margin, clocking at like 47 minutes. And it's pretty heavy as well. and it's very like I think like more like rhythmically focused. Like there's a lot of really cool like drum work going on, tons of like awesome bass work, and like you always mentioned, like there's some really good melodies. I think Hagen's written like good melodies like always, but there's some like really like infectious melodies on this album, especially like the one we always talk about, like the ending of Puzzle Box is just like super emotional, and obviously the instrumental track No by Mouth has like a ton of like memorable melodies. It's also like structured in like a really good way, which is like one of my main complaints about it the first time I listened to it, but I've come to like love like the structure of the album. I think Clear is like probably my favorite opener they've ever written to an album. Either that or The Path. I'm torn on that. But Clear just like sets up the album perfectly and like really flows into The Good Doctor like amazing, like in such an amazing way. And obviously my favorite track on the album is Veil, and we've talked about this song before. Just like super good song, so many memorable moments. Got a really cool like switch in the middle where it like literally feels like it has turned into a different song, and also the guitar solos at the end of that song are like some of my favorite moments in Haken's discography. So it's a really good album, and it's great, and I've like completely turned on how I felt about it. I think I gave it like a 7.8 when I or something like low like that. Yeah. And now it's like in 41 of my favorites of all time. Yeah. And it's an album I return to like often. I think it's like, I don't know, it's 40, it's not super long. It's like an easy album. It's not an easy album like digest, but if once you like get into it and like it, it's an easy album to throw on and just like jam out for like 45 minutes. So that's 41.
All right. So my next one, number 42 for me, is one that used to be like way higher back in the day, but I wasn't sure when I made this list, when I started making it, that it was going to be on here at all. But the album is Crack the Sky by Mastodon. And it is now the highest up one of Mastodon. Used to be, I liked Blood Mountain by them better, but Mastodon, I spoke earlier when I was talking about Giant Squid, about what Giant Squid doesn't sound like, and Mastodon is one of those bands that Giant Squid doesn't sound like. Mastodon, they are like they play like a brand of progressive sludge that is more like bouncy, and like they have like shreddy guitar solos everywhere, and they've got really cool drums, really fast drums. They've got some really fast sections in general, and they have some cool tight riffage that changes a lot, and like lots of interesting stuff going on. It's very energetic, a lot less like it's still like got a good atmosphere, but it's not, the point isn't to like build like a crazy atmosphere. It's more like, this is a good album and sounds good on your ears, and it does. Also though, this album is another concept album that is I used to know like all the details about it, but now I know that it's mostly about like this weird Russia-y thing, but really it's about the drummer Brand Ayler's sister dying when she was very young, or at least it's like an homage to her. She committed suicide, I think. Yeah, which made it very sad, and also it's a very sad album overall, I'd say. Even though like it is kind of bouncy, it uses that kind of bounciness to portray a lot of kind of sad emotions, which I think is one of the things they do really well. The guitarist, Brent Hines, he is a really good guitarist, and he's like really good at playing super technical shreddy solos but making them emotional, especially on songs like The Czar, where it, like the whole song, like it builds up to this one like crazy guitar solo basically, that is like very fast and like hard to play and everything, but at the same time it's like very, very emotional. And the same with The Last Baron. I know like in general, I've said over and over on this podcast, and Brandon has too, that I don't think that shreddy guitar solos are inherently like not emotional, but I think that Brent Hines in particular does like a really good job of making them like very emotional. Also, this album has really good production, I think, has really good bass work and really good drums. Brent Hines is like Brand Ayler is one of the best, I think, like progressive metal drummers around. Like, it's kind of legendary at this point because this album came out a long time ago. Mastodon's been around for a while, and they're one of the more popular progressive metal bands. So people know about him, and he's like been around long enough to influence a lot of people and like make a lot of noise in the genre. And so this album overall is really good. It served a really good purpose. Like Brandon was talking about images and words being kind of like a gateway album for him going into progressive metal. I think this was kind of a gateway album for me after listening to Opeth, because when I first got into Opeth, I listened to them nonstop for like a really long time. And then this is one of the first like not Opeth progressive metal bands I listened to after that, honestly. So I really enjoyed this album back in the day, and I still do, and it's still really like memorable. Although it's not quite as high as it used to be. But that's not to say it's like fallen from grace or anything, or like I don't like it. So my favorite songs in the album, it used to be like definitely The Last Baron, but now I think it's like kind of tied with The Czar, just because I think that song, it really starts out with these really cool jungle-y keyboard things.
Yeah,
that sound like you're in like a jungle and they're all isolated.
I love that song so much.
Yeah, and then it starts, and then
it's
it has
got a really cool progression.
Mm-hmm. It does, and then it has like the part where they're all like saying kind of like "Don't stay, run away."
It's your own fault.
Yeah, that, and then it like bursts out into that energetic riff that goes on, and it's like really energetic for a while before like I'm gonna say spiraling into that solo, which is fucking really crazy, and then it kind of calms back down towards the end.
The other part where it's like it's the part, is that the same song where it's right in front of me? Is that?
I think so. Yeah. I haven't listened to it for a while, honestly. Yeah. But also Oblivion's really good too, and it starts off with those. It's such an iconic start to an album.
Also, it's like Brent Hines is like this really weird like southern twangy kind of voice.
He does,
it's really strange, and I think it like adds a lot to their music. I don't think he's like technically like super good at singing.
No,
but, like I think like it serves a purpose within Mastodon's music.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think they honestly the three vocalist like attack on this album is also really good. That was really well done, because it makes it sound like there's like makes it sound more epic, you know, when there's like multiple vocalists who are all doing really good. So I love this album a lot. It's very good. Not as high as it used to be, but still very high, still good. The next one, number 41, last one of this episode, is an album by a band that I recently saw live, very recently, you could say. And the band is Pallbearer, and the album is Heartless,
I didn't know this would be on the list.
Yeah, so this is another one like I Am the Morning, which is very sad, and I think if they're having a battle just exclusively on sadness, I think I Am the Morning would have to win. But I think this one is like almost as sad as that, but kind of different. It doesn't sound anything like I Am the Morning. This is like kind of a progressive doom sort of album. You know, with mostly, I think this album has like all clean vocals.
All clean.
Yeah, all cleans. And you know, it's kind of part of this group of new bands that we've talked about on here before, where it's like kind of progressive doom bands, and they all have like a different sound, like Pallbearer and Chemist and Yob kind of. Yob isn't always like, they're not all always clean vocals, but like a lot of clean vocals, and like
a lot of those bands have like gone more towards clean vocals. Like, I used to use clean vocals at all. Now they use a lot of clean vocals now.
Yeah, exactly.
And
so
Chemist rarely uses them. Like,
exactly.
Very sparingly.
So it's like kind of a new wave of like the kind of doom bands, and I feel like those bands, even though they all get lumped in together, like they all sound different enough to where it like doesn't sound like they're copying each other or anything. I think those are three really good bands. But anyways, back to the point. Pallbearer, Heartless, very sad album. The album art is really good, really really good album art, which portrays a man kind of like clutching himself and like in almost like the fetal position, but like sitting up though. And that's like what the album makes you feel like, because it's like an emotionally draining album. It has song titles like I Saw the End and Heartless and The Lie of Survival and A Plea for Understanding. So you get just from the title, the song titles, that it's like pretty sad album. But the style in general, it's like doomy, like I said. It's got some slowish guitar work, but I think the guitar work is actually really good throughout the whole thing. There's lots of like kind of almost like slower noodling, you know, going on. That interplays really well with the drums and also with the vocals, which are like fantastic. I think the singer does like an amazing job of like putting his voice into the music and like making it one kind of package that like delivers a big old punch to the heart. Anyways, so this is a very good album. Pallbearer, Heartless. I like it a lot. My favorite song on the album is A Plea for Understanding, because that song is good. It has some cool melodies and stuff. Cool sad melodies, for sure.
All right, well, that concludes this episode of ProgPod. We are very delighted to be back, and we hope all of you are excited as well. Next week, we will tackle 40 through 31 in our favorite albums of all time. And yeah, we will see you in a couple of weeks with more of our lists.
Yeah. We know you guys like lists.
We love lists just as much as you guys do.
Okay.
Make some of your own lists.
So
Don't be lazy.
Put them in the comments.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to put your own lists of top albums.
Yeah, and you can release them in segments of 10 if you are so inclined to do so.
Put your number 50 through 41 albums in the comments. And then we'll pick our favorite one next time. And you'll get a free trip to Mount Pleasant to tour the ProgPod studios.
Yeah, we keep this part. I feel like this part needs to be kept in here. Yeah, I don't want you to edit this out.
No, I won't.
Yeah, you'll get a free trip to the ProgPod studios. It's a big production site we have going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we'll dump you off, like, when you're done, it, like, dumps you off to a gift shop.